when we kind of go back and everything. So how is it going to look, whether it be from a scholastic point of view? Obviously Joey's at SAIT working with them, and for those of you that have kids out there, how does the next year look, September? So lots of questions, lots of stuff, lots of ambiguity, I guess you could say. So there needs to be lots of adaptation, I think, and that's sort of a definite driver for everyone these days. So control what you can control, right, Mr. Roa?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, so we're just coming up to 12 o'clock, so I think we will get started. First of all, I would like to say welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us in our continuing Lunch and Learn series at PMI-SAC. Today we are sponsored by SAIT, and happenstance, we do happen to have with us today Mr. Joey Roa. He is an instructor at SAIT. He's in the Agile Transformation. He does project, program, and product management with them over there. And I was just learning it sounds like his portfolio is expanding. And just to throw things in the mix, he is also the director of the Agile Center of Excellence over at Suncor. So I've been very fortunate to see and hear Mr. Roa speak previously on different topics, and he is always very, very engaging and very, very open. So that's one of the things I love about listening to Joey speak and everything. He's very honest. It's very genuine, which is great. Today, he is going to be talking to us about the product owner and their role within an enterprise. I know, Joey, you had promised some dancing and some fireworks, so I'm very curious as to how that's going to sort of transpire and pop up and everything, so which will be great. Awesome. And just to remind everybody that we will, if you do have questions, please just throw them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat. We're going to save some time at the end for Joey to kind of answer some questions. So just populate them in the chat if you don't mind. And so once again, this is sponsored by SAIT, so thank you very much. It's really, really awesome that we are able to still keep our sponsors and everybody's really engaged. And without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Joey.
Great, thank you very much, Kevin. And it was good to catch up just beforehand. I appreciate that, as you said, the opportunity to check some boxes on some, Stephen Covey, right? The emotional bank account. So putting some good dollars in there.
Absolutely.
I gotta say, I'm just looking at the gallery view, and Brian Stack, just to kind of call you out, I love your icon there. If you're in the gallery view for Zoom, you can just see that he has the big gulp background there. So I just wanted to quickly share that, Brian. Thought that was pretty good. All right, well, let's jump into it. So thank you for the warm introduction, Kevin, and I appreciate been a long-standing supporter and fan of PMI, both local chapter, but also PMI Global. So I support that, and certainly SAIT has been great for me for a number of years. So I'm very grateful to the opportunity to speak on their behalf and share some good news and some good word about the Agile workspace, specifically product ownership. So in kind of a 45 minute type conversation, do want this to be somewhat abbreviated because it's over the lunch hour. I also want to make sure we are carving time for you folks to throw some questions my way. So in the 45 minutes together, we want to share a little bit about the observations that we've had at Suncor in terms of how we've adopted or are trying to adopt not only Agile, but more specifically, the product owner role inside of the organization. So we've had some pros and we've had some cons, some successes, some wins on that, and obviously some missteps where if I can share that and people can learn from those missteps, fantastic. And then also, through the questions and feedback afterwards, I do want to hear back from you, right? I believe strongly in community, so I want to hear back. And do you agree with some of the stuff I said, and do you disagree, and why is that? And it's okay to disagree. And are there questions, right? Very much in that servant leadership mindset. If there's stuff I can help answer a question for, I'd love to be able to throw that out, throw the answers out there and help people along. So Kevin, you kind of stole my slide here, so I guess that's good. I'm going to be verbose, so you're trying to speed me along, so I appreciate that.
I was just curious about that. Sorry.
I know when I'm actually in the audience, either virtually or otherwise, I always wonder about who's speaking and what in what context are they providing the information. And so from my standpoint, just to kind of level set this quick, as Kevin said, I do head up the Suncor's Digital Services Center of Excellence. So inside of that, we have DevOps. Inside of that, we have the Agile Center of Excellence. So really big things as it relates to the Agile community. I've been doing a lot of speaking through SAIT and PMI and global congresses on Agile transformations and PMOs, projects and programs. The good thing about that is not only does that help me validate some of my own education, my own learnings, my own experiences, it also gives me an opportunity to hear back. And so a lot of the input that you'll see into the collaterals I share with you is coming from people all over the world. So even in the content here today, it's from folks that have contributed through either BP, British Petroleum. Some of their observations are baked in here. Same thing with Exxon, same thing with some of the globals. Doing a lot of PMOs for quite some time, and then spent quite a bit of time in the whole education camp doing some teaching. I don't want to spend too much time on me. I do want to spend a second or two just to talk about this though, because it's relevant to the conversation. Is I think when people say that they're doing an agile transformation, one of the first questions that should be asked is, well, tell me more about the company, because a company that's trying to do an agile transformation to a large enterprise, they face very different challenges. And there's always challenges, but the challenges faced by an enterprise are very different than the challenges faced by, say, a small startup or a small enterprise. And so for us, and this is just the Suncor perspective, we are Canada's largest integrated company, so integrated. We have about 15,000 people across, I'll say across North America, but predominantly in Canada, in Calgary, and also in the Ontario marketplace, a lot up in Fort McMurray, obviously with our big operations up there. We're in year 3. I can't believe I'm actually saying that. We're in year 3 of our Agile transformation. And so what I'm really excited about in terms of doing that, and there's a few folks online that I recognize the names for, 2.5 years ago, I wasn't even sure how this was going to go. People always told me that the Agile transformations usually takes 3 kicks, and usually there's 3 different Agile transformation leaders associated with that. So being the first one up, I wasn't really sure how I'd progress with that. But we're in year 3. And I'm very happy to say that not only have we had a lot of success with the Agile transformation in the IT space, it's also being adopted in the business space as well. And so there's nothing more about a testament to success than the business actually adopting what we've been evangelizing and encouraging. So for us, we have turnarounds now being done out in the East Coast, following our Agile approach, our Agile methodology, complete with Scrum Masters and product owners in role. We have some of the bigger projects up north now starting to employ Agile ways of working as they go forward with it. So we're really, really jazzed on the success that Agile is starting to have inside the organization. Now, a little bit more centered on the D&IT, or the IT department specifically, is that we do about 150 to 200 projects a year. Kind of depends on how you slice that. We do have some programs in there. We also have some products. So the product model is starting to take hold within the organization. And so about 150 million, about 150 projects, about 230 million in capital budget is for our IT portfolio. And once again, kind of a little bit proud of the team. The 44% of those numbers, and that's as of last week, 44% of those projects are actually Agile based. So again, very, very happy with some of that success. One of the myths out there, very little of our projects are software development. We do have some, but most of them are common off the shelf. Most of them are your traditional enterprise type IT projects. We only have about 15% of our projects are software development. And why that's relevant for this conversation is that the product owners and Agile is still being used, even though it's not a software development project. So that's a good grounding for us. The last 2 pieces, or last 2 bullets there, also very relevant for organizations going through this journey and what the impact is to a product owner, is that we're an engineering company. Like we build really big things, and if we don't do it right, there's a danger of these things blowing up. So we are very waterfall centric. We're very engineering centric. We're very cost centric. We're all those things that come with a command and control type mindset for capital construction or big asset-based construction, that's our legacy mindset. And while I want to say we're moving, from the applaud of some of the success, yeah, we're making some headway with the agile mindset and the lean mindset. There's still a lot of resistance that we're encountering. And then the last bullet point is that we're also heavily matrixed. So we love our consultants, we love our specialization. So while we're trying to move into the world of cross-functional teams, small, agile, nimble teams, a lot of dedicated persistence is what we're encouraging. We still have a lot of that whole traditional, we're very matrixed, but we're also very specialized in our roles. And the last piece of the puzzle here, to set the context, is that we're also in the midst of a digital transformation. And so there are some really cool things going on for us in the organization. So everything from the use of drones, the use of robotics, the autonomous haul trucks, so those big heavy hauler trucks that can carry 400 tons worth of ore, those are all now being delivered in an autonomous fashion. So it's some fascinating things going on. RPA, robotic process automation. So we've got some really cool stuff going on. And also happy to say, as a Calgarian, we're moving into an in-source model. So we're starting to move away from the outsource model. And just as that perpetual pendulum, it's not to say we won't have our offshore partners. It's not to say we won't use third-party consultants and contractors, but we're starting to realize that we want to have more of a brain trust to actually carry a Suncor employee badge as opposed to otherwise. So we're going through that whole digital transformation as well as that insourcing piece. So lots of work there. So a little bit about me, but then also a little bit about Suncor, and then finally, before we get into the meat of the content, about Agile. I think it's tough to throw a rock and not hit a periodical that has some reference point into an agile way of working, agile reference. Thank goodness for things like Gartner and Forbes and CIO and HBR and all those. There's lots of information that you can pull for wherever you're looking to build a case towards. But just some of the ones that I wanted to highlight here is, from 2018, Capgemini, management consultancy, for those not familiar, is that 83% of the firms have either started or are starting their agile transformation. In 2020, the Business Agility Report. This is a really good report. For those of you that have access to it, I encourage it. The 258 firms surveyed, and most of those are larger firms, so north of 1,000 people. The 258 firms surveyed, 100%, so all of them, are actually trying to improve their agility. Now you can argue about how the question's been framed, but this puts in my mind, this puts a big spotlight or a big magnifying glass on agile ways of working, to which roles are incredibly crucial for. Forrester, similar to Gartner, 51% of firms, according to the 2018 report, are going down an agile path. A lot of hybrid, and then some are pure agile. But there's always a flip side, right? And so while there's a lot of positivity here, the State of Agile report, a couple things to call out. Half the firms are still mature in their agile practices. Suncor would be the same. So we're happy where we are, but we know we have to keep moving and have to keep improving. And in 2020, that State of Agile report, there's also a lot of general resistance to the agile way of working. And Suncor would also echo that exact same claim, is that while we've had some great success, we've had some great adoption, we've also had some flameouts, but we continue to encounter a lot of that resistance that comes with an agile way of working and letting go of some of those long-held beliefs. So for us, these stats are great, but it's also nice to see that they're calling out there's some challenges as well. So let's get to the meat of the content then, right? And so to talk about, my ambition today is to talk more about what does a product owner look like inside the organization, inside of a large organization. And it's easy to look at what you see in literature. You can look at the Scrum Guide, you can look at Scrum Alliance, Agile Alliance. There's a lot of really smart people in those organizations. And they've started with what we call a base case. This is what a product owner looks like. This is what we think a product owner should do or should not do in some cases. And yet when you start to take this into the enterprise, a lot of stuff starts to come almost competing forces against that theory. And so in the next little bit here, next handful of slides, I want to make sure that we have a common understanding what best practice would say, or leading practice would say a product owner is meant to look like and articulate. And then from there, I want to also share 4 or 5 myths. Like, here are the myths where we see, here's the theory, here's what Suncor has observed, and here's what we're doing about that observation. So that's kind of my intended plan of attack here. So to do that, make sure that we're all on the same page when we talk about a product owner. So first and foremost, and this is from Ken Schwalber. So if you don't know him, he's one of the grand poobahs of Agile and Scrum and all things, for where we've evolved to. So he has some great quotes on here, and they're a little bit verbose for the next couple of slides. But the product owner, it's the one and only one person responsible for managing the backlog and establishing the value that the team is actually working towards. So whatever that team is garnering and putting their effort towards, that's at the behest or the direction of the product owner. And so wherever that product owner is chasing value, the team is going to follow. So it's an incredibly important role from this, and it's only one and only one person for it. Now, part and parcel to that, Ken's quote there, is that when you think of a singular backlog in support of that product, is that one product owner is a person to make sure it's maintained or well refined, but also so it's clearly visible. And part of visibility to me means it's understood. So that one person's maintaining it, providing that consistent direction, but also making sure that it's understood and visible to all. So supporting that transparency, one of the pillars of empiricism. The next piece, just to kind of quickly ground that as well. So this is right from the Scrum Guide, the new version from 2020. So what is the product owner? Well, a product owner is all about maximizing value. So if you want to have a very simple term for a leadership that you might be speaking to or conversing with, what does a product owner do? They're all about maximizing value. Now, how you achieve that, again, a lot of variability, a lot of wide swaths towards that. But based upon that, on the definition from Scrum Guide, they're accountable for maximizing value. Some of the things that they're also really focused upon is in terms of the backlog management, supporting what Ken said a second ago, is developing and explicitly communicating the product goal. For those that are, for the Scrum fans in the audience, product goal is new to the 2020 Scrum Guide. But so the product owner is making sure, do we understand that product goal? Is that well understood and well articulated? That's on the product owner's shoulders. In terms of making sure that the team understands where they're going, is creating and communicating the backlog items. So the PBIs, as they say. And then ordering the product backlog based upon value or based upon risk. So that the higher valued ones, the more risk reducing ones are higher up in the backlog. And then that last piece, and then from my own experiences now, as a PO, as a product owner, but also working with product owners, this is a big piece, making sure that is the product backlog, is it transparent? So it means that as things go sideways, is that well understood? As things take longer, is that well understood? Is the backlog visible for all to see, so that you're no longer trying to go down the whole death by 1,000 cuts of PowerPoint? You're making that product backlog and its progression visible for people to see. And is it understood? So the value, why that articulation is there. So here are some of that. Those are based upon the Scrum Guide. So Jeff Patton, I'm sure there's some people out there that would recognize the name. Jeff Patton is the gentleman who literally wrote the book on user stories and story mapping. So the product owner, according to Jeff, is a subject matter expert. They're an end user advocate, customer advocate. You can argue those are the same thing. Business advocate, communicator, and decision maker. A lot embroiled into each one of those. But really what you're, in terms of one of the Agile coaches that work for me, he framed it best, is that the product owner is the authority of the work. And the authority of the work really entails that, do they have the respect and the confidence, and I'll say the leadership, whether it's given to them or just by either positional or just through knowledge. Do they understand enough of the work where they can speak to it? They can actually represent that to their customers and the constituencies, so the end users, the IT folks, the business folks, and articulate that. So when you look at these last 3 slides, it's pretty, I'd say some people would say it's very self-explanatory. It sounds very easy. Well, there's a corresponding flip side. is that when you look at, for those of you that are in the PMI camp, myself included, PMI recently bought Discipline Agile. And Discipline Agile, there's two gentlemen that are kind of the brain trust behind that. That's Mark Lyons and Scott Ambler. So, and both very well-trenched veterans in the space. Scott had a very good definition or very good articulation of the product owner, and it's incredibly difficult. And I want to spend a moment or two on this slide because it does lead into the next handful of slides that we'll talk about. Is that in Scott's mind, the product owner role is incredibly difficult, and there's some reasons for it. Is that in a big company, empowerment is really challenging. So when big companies have grown into command and controlled hierarchies, where the smartest guy in the room is often called the highest paid person in the room. And so in terms of being able to empower a team that's more grassroots as opposed to hierarchical, empowering a team can be very difficult. What's interesting is that the other piece that I've highlighted here, not only is it difficult in command and control environments, it's also equally difficult for a product owner to be successful in consensus-driven environments. Because what that does, it means that whereas a product owner, based upon the last few slides, we want them to be able to make a decision. We want them to be able to order a backlog based upon value or risk reduction. We want them to be able to direct the team in the pursuit of that value. As soon as they go into consensus decision-making, it's incredibly challenging. So in some of the courses I teach, where we talk about different types of power, you know, as a Canadian, I love consensus. You know, it just makes me feel warm and fuzzy. You know, one of my standard jokes that I think some of you have always heard, right, is how do you get 20 Canadians over a swimming pool? Well, you ask them, right? We're polite and kind of nod our head and we go along. As a project manager, though, you know, your worst decision-making apparatus is consensus. Because as soon as you have to get 10, 15, 20 people to agree, someone won't. And so then you're now caught up in this churn of trying to get universal agreement. It's the same thing here. So consensus as a product owner can be very challenging. One of the quotes a past mentor of mine used to always say is that collaboration is required, but consensus is not. And so I really like that for as a product owner, as a mindset or a stance, is that you always want the product owner to be collaborative and collegiate, but it isn't a consensus-driven world. It is a collaborative-driven world. Next couple of pieces in here, in the larger organizations with those hierarchies, we also build up cultural walls. And you know, there's a running joke, and I know within the PMI community, there's certainly a lot of IT folks. Well, how often is IT kind of the whipping boy within the organization? Or how often do we actually reference that there's a fraction between the IT folks and the business folks? Well, those walls are not limited to IT and the business, they're even within the business units themselves. And so as you have projects and products that span organizational boundaries, that can be very difficult for a product owner to span those organizational boundaries to make a decision or to drive value into the organization. Very difficult. Next handful of pieces here is that full-time. We'll talk about that as a myth. So for Scott and Mark, they want to have they've identified stakeholders in pursuit of the product owner role that are full-time, able and willing to make decisions. And we'll talk about that also as one of the myths there, and who have many of the skills needed. What's ironic is a lot of this last little bullet point, we gravitate towards saying, let's focus on the skills. Let's focus in on the backlog and the relative estimating or all these other line items. These can be taught, they can be coached, they can be mentored, and you'll develop that skill through hands-on. It's these other pieces that are a lot more difficult, that take a lot more time, that we are often neglectful for before we get the product owner moving forward. So once again, last 3-4 slides, just wanted to quickly ground what is the product owner role, what's the responsibility, the accountability by the experts. And then I'm very appreciative of Scott for also presenting, and this is why it's so difficult. And so now if we jump forward with that, let's compare some of those myths against some of the realities that I've experienced at Suncor. And as a quick just caveat or catch-all there, most of these will be, I'll say, generalizations to the Suncor environment. we're running quite a few projects now in the Agile fashion. This doesn't apply to everyone. So when I talk about your product owner or a Scrum Master, that's not ubiquitous across everyone. It's more about an overarching generalization. I think we have some amazing product owners at Suncor that I think have really embraced and stepped into the role. Same thing for Scrum Master, same thing for all those pieces. So I don't want anyone thinking that this applies to every single individual. But the first myth, and this is one that's important to call out right away. I know when the Agile COE at Suncor was going, this was one of our initial stances. You know, a product owner, it must come from the business. It was almost a non-negotiable. If it's not from the business, you're not Agile, how dare you? Well, as we went forward, we realized that might have been a little naive on our part. So our experience is that if you can't get a person from the business, fantastic. But more often than not, the business folks are they're too busy. We can't get a person from the business to be 100% dedicated to a project or to a product. In some cases we have, but by and large, it doesn't happen. The other one is the second bullet point here. This kind of caught me off guard when we got going with the Agile COE. People will hear the term product owner. And if you think back to that command and control and the hierarchy and you know, the smartest person in the room is the highest paid person in the room, all of a sudden we had people who thought, well, if it's a product owner, and I like that word owner, I must have to be a VP or a general manager or someone really high up in the organization for me to step into that role. And yet, if you think about that and you look at the other side of that coin, if you're a VP or a director or a GM, odds are you're pretty busy. So for you to actually be able to allocate, you know, out of a 40-hour work week, for you to be able to allocate 20, 30, 40 hours to the product owner role as a GM or a VP, very unlikely. And then the last piece here, and this is where, again, just building on where Scott was highlighting, more and more of our projects are, and this is now in the industry, not localized to Suncor, our projects are more enterprise structured. When you think of cloud-based systems, ERPs, the big monolithic systems coming into an organization span organizational boundaries. And so for us now to say that you can have a product owner that can represent multiple business units, it's pretty challenging, because one business unit was very reluctant to say, I'm going to have a person from a different group represent my needs. We encountered a lot of resistance about that. And so then became inevitably the leadership would say, well, let's have 2 product owners, or let's have 3 product owners. And we know that to be also a resounding big warning sign that you do not want to pursue if you can avoid. So for us, we started to see these 3 bullet points started to come up quite a bit. So how do we respond? So over time, the Agile COE, we start to relax our, hey, this has to come from the business or we can't do it. Even within Scrum, so John McBreal and some of the other thought leaders in product ownership, they'll recognize this as a good fallback, and that's the use of proxies. It's not great, it's not the best, but in some cases, you know, it's better than nothing. And so for us, we started to use proxies. And these proxies came from the development group, the business development group. The proxies came from business analysis, from the application stewards, or the project organization as a whole. And what we found is that a lot of these proxies actually were really, really effective, really powerful in terms of actually, they understood the business, they understood the value proposition, they understood the stakeholder groups. And so for us, this actually proved to be very effective in terms of moving forward. And then what we also did, because these were people that were lower, I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, they were lower in the food chain relative to a VP or a GM, the Agile Center of Excellence actually worked with that product owner and the product owner communities and stakeholder groups to make sure, did they have the right capabilities, especially if they're coming from a group that maybe wouldn't traditionally be Agile centric. Did they actually have the space and the autonomy and the authority to actually do the work properly? So space being, no, you can't do this at 10 hours a week. You probably need to be here 20, 30, 40 hours a week. Can you make the decisions? And here's why. Here's the dangers of context switching. Here's the dangers of having to have a decision go up the food chain 3 or 4 times. You're going to destroy the speed or velocity of a team. Your cycle time or lead time, drop metric acronyms for you folks. The cycle time and lead time when you don't have an autonomous PO is horrible. So we were able to demonstrate that quite quickly. And then same thing, we worked on the product owners actually having the right authority and decision rights. And that was one of the perquisites of the Agile COE, being an enterprise focus group, is that can we now start to carve out that they own the backlog, and here's why they own the backlog, and here are the mechanics behind it. And then inevitably there's governance groups who have their own mandates. So the Agile Center of Excellence would work with finance, with risk, with cyber, to make sure that they could bubble wrap, my language, and protect the product owner and the team from all the would-be churn that can get caught up in some of the traditional parts of the organization. So jump into myth number 2, is that product owners have the power. Also a good, in theory, they can make all these unilateral decisions, they can pursue value, they can get empirical feedback and react accordingly. Well, what we found more often than not, that they weren't autonomous. More often than not, they weren't empowered to actually do the work as they saw fit. And one of the easiest symptoms on that is that instead of reporting based upon your backlog or reporting out of your Jira or whatever your Azure DevOps, whatever tool you might be using, you know, the POs were having to go through litanies of I'll call it PowerPoint hell. We had circumstances where you had to have purchase orders and go up and down the food chain, 4 or 5 different layers. And so this was clearly evidence that the product owners weren't as empowered or as autonomous as we want. We also found that product owners, even when they were given the authority and the empowerment, they weren't dealing with dedicated or persistent teams. So more often than not, we encourage that from a Scrum-based team or from an Agile-based team. But more often than not, for us at the starting, is that we had the siloed, we had the heavily matrix teams. And so really present the challenges for a product owner to be very effective in their decision-making and moving quickly. And this last one is also a surprise to me. And that's partly my nature, but also just when you think of the history of Suncor, we're very much a governing organization as opposed to a doing organization. So we'd hire consultants, we hire other people, and we were really good at signing invoices. We weren't so good at actually doing the work. So as we started to change that, we found that product owners, even when they were given the accountability, they felt very uncomfortable with that accountability. So all of a sudden, it's something that now they're being judged instead of being the judge themselves. So this creates some friction and some resistance. So how did we respond in this, Suncor as a whole? Is that we certainly spent a lot of time and effort on understanding the servant leadership model. And so this is, lots of literature out there, and I encourage people to take a spin through some of that. So examples of how we would do this is that we would get the leaders to push back on decisions. So when a product owner or a team went to a VP or a GM or a director and asking for guidance or asking for a decision or asking for an approval on a purchase order or whatever the case might be, we were trying to get those leaders to push back and say, no, this is something you guys should be answering. Let me know what you decide and go forward. And even when the mistakes were made, because inevitably a mistake will occur, don't hammer the team. Talk about that in the context of, now, what did we learn from that? How can we move forward in a different fashion? What value did we get from making this mistake? Because there always is value from those mistakes if you look for them. So we encourage that as a heavy emphasis. The next piece on here, to try to curtail some of that PowerPoint hell, is that we encourage the no PowerPoint update. PowerPoints, we're using it right now. PowerPoints are awesome. It's an awesome tool, but it's also an incredibly, it takes away value. It's a value robbing tool. So when you're in a big organization and you see all these really high polished PowerPoints, well, what that means is that someone actually spent a heck of a lot of time polishing that PowerPoint instead of working on whatever that product might be. Instead of working on creating value, they're working on creating a PowerPoint for a leader that might only be a 15-minute update. And then that PowerPoint goes into a live link or some other digital landfill, never to see the light of day again. So we encourage the no PowerPoint rule. So all of a sudden now teams had to provide updates using Jira, using Confluence, using the tools that the team is using. And if a leader wanted an update, they had to come find out what the team is doing. So we really encourage that type of adoption of how updates would go. And yes, this was a slow process, but happy to say that we're getting a lot of traction now. at the start, it was really slow. This next one, I encourage people to take a look at this actually and try it in your own organization, is that we start to track persistence. And I'll give credit to Mark Lyons. I don't know if he was the original author of this formula, but Mark Lyons shared this with me quite a year or so ago, and it's called the employee focus factor. And this is simply just a ratio. It's the one over the number of initiatives that they're working on. So ideally, you want that 1-to-1. One employee working on one initiative, it's a whole number. If they're working on 2 initiatives, it's 1/2. So the more you get that denominator that goes up, you can quickly see how that ratio gets really skewed quickly. So when you start to look upon this in your organization or in your department, this is a really eye-opening number for leadership to go, holy cow, you have people scattered across 3 or 4, 10 projects. And when you count context switching, which can be upwards of 20% damaging to a person's time, this can be just deathly. We actually had one person working on 17 initiatives. Just try to factor how that person's at all productive across those 17. So we started to track that so we could highlight that to leadership. And then last but not least is that we also started to work with the product owners to get more comfortable with easing their comfort with taking accountability in small chunks. You can't just flip a switch and have them take full accountability. We started to go down that in a small fashion. Next myth here is that we had the role defined. We had the PowerPoints of what the role was. Looked really good. So we made the assumption that people would step into that role fully empowered, fully equipped, and fully capable for it. Well, you know what? My naivety, and once again, Sean, clear and bright, product owners actually had very little knowledge of what to do. We gave them the title. They looked around, they had a team staring at them, but they didn't know what to do next. They said, well, create a vision. Product owner didn't know how to create a vision. That's not innate. That's not something that just comes, you come out of the womb going, I can create visions. You actually have to be able to develop that as a skill. We also had people coming from different aspects of the business that had different preconceived notions about what the role does and what it doesn't do. So we had lots of people thinking that the product owner role was on a pedestal. They would sit there and anoint things to go forward and give kind of a proverbial thumbs up, thumbs down on things. They did not realize the hands-on role, the hands-on skills required to make this role effective. And then even part and parcel with that, as we got going with Agile across the board, other teams started to provide information about what product owners should and shouldn't do. And that created some conflicting messages. So is it PowerPoint hell or is it not PowerPoint? So we had some of those messages that we had to get in front of. So what did we do here? Is that we did create, and this is in the Suncor of the organization, we did create some onboarding and training curriculums right away, and I'll say to large effect or large success. And to quickly ground my definitions, onboarding is about awareness. Onboarding is saying, here's what the role is, here's what it entails, here's what a good product owner might look like, here's where what we would not want them to actually meander into. Compare and contrast onboarding with training. Training is about capability development. So now that we have people aware of the role, let's spend time to understand what is a backlog. How do you refine a backlog? How do you split stories? How do you estimate stories? How do you prioritize based upon value? How do you articulate or visualize a vision? So all sounds like stuff that we should have innate. We made sure that people understood that. And we followed the 70-20-10 rule. So 10% is education, 20% is coaching and feedback or mentorship, and then 70% of that capability development came from doing. So the 70-10 rule. We create a product owner community of practice where people can safely come together, where product owners can safely come together and share experiences and issues. No leadership, no development teams were in there, no scrum masters were in there. All you had is like a PO support group get together and talk about, wow, this isn't going well, or wow, this is going really well. And so this allowed for that for those product owners to actually build that network where they could cross collaborate and develop some skill and capability and network in there. And then we also created leadership decks and we surfed the organization charts to get ahead of that mixed messaging. So what we wanted to target was that VP and GM level and say, hey, when you have an Agile project, here's what a product owner should and shouldn't be doing. Here's the capabilities they should or should not have. So we were trying to get ahead of where those Agile projects were going and making sure the messaging came from on high in a very consistent fashion. Myth number 4, I got my PSPO. That's the Professional Scrum Product Owner designation. So if I'm certified, I'm set. Well, once again, you can probably guess it doesn't quite work out that way. We found, and now it's not to say that training is not an important piece, external training. External training is a vital piece. And in fact, that's a big cornerstone, I'll say, the COE success inside of Suncor. And when I talk to my peers in other groups, same thing. A big part of their success is education and training from the third parties. But what we also saw is that the third parties provided basic cursory information. What it lacked is that they didn't have the examples relevant to Suncor. So we had to actually augment that, just to jump over here, whether we include our own training collaterals to support external training that made more references back to a Suncor project or a Suncor business unit. That speaking that same language, speaking the experiences that has some commonality, really helped to ground that. So the product owners inside the Suncor world, when we brought the external parties in, teaching the great capability, but they needed more relevant industry and company examples, company-specific examples. You can go through, do a backlog, and one of the infamous stories out there, do a backlog about how you get dressed in the morning, do a backlog about how you prepare breakfast. Well, that's good. However, if you're also trying to drive a $20 million project, it's probably not enough to actually get them going. So this was some feedback from our own staff on that. But on the flip side, what we also found is that people like the certifications. So what we found is that our staff, they actually like getting the PSPO designation. They like getting the PSPM designation. They like getting that sense of accomplishment that was offered by the external parties. And that's something that we could not provide inside the organization. So how did we solve for that? We partnered with some of the, I'll say, some top shelf third party vendors to offer certificate opportunities. As I mentioned, we augmented the training programs with Suncor explicit examples. And as we got going, we had more examples to draw from, both on the positive and the negative. People learn a lot from the projects that didn't go so well. So we had lots of opportunities to say, hey, here's a project that went really well, mimic that. Here's some projects that had some stumbles, don't do that. So we had those opportunities there. And then we also used our communities of practice I just mentioned. We use those to extend the training concepts into day-to-day. So how do you split a story? We use these communities of practice to take the theory and help the POs help one another and build up that capability. And number 5, and this is the last myth, and then I'll go through a quick recommendation to ground where we are in the presentation, is that my friendly neighborhood Scrum Master, along with others, will help. And this is, if you believe in that adage, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a village to make a product owner. And so what we found, and this is even in the Scrum Guide and others, the product owner is meant to be supported, meant to be supported by coaches, meant to be supported by Scrum Masters explicitly. When you look at the literature coming out of Scrum.org or Scrum Alliance or Agile Alliance, they put the Scrum Master there as a key crutch or a key support mechanism for a product owner. But what we found is that the Scrum Masters, they weren't really well versed in a lot of the, sorry, that's a typo. They weren't well versed in the product owner capabilities, not capacities, capabilities. Now that's also a function that our Scrum Master maturity was quite low, remains, I'll say, relatively low. Notwithstanding that we have some amazing Scrum Masters in the organization. So it's not a reflection to any specific Scrum Master, really want to call it out. But our Scrum Masters, they were really good at running the ceremonies, the Scrum ceremonies and events. They weren't so good at actually helping a product owner create a vision. They weren't so good at having a Scrum or helping a product owner do a story map or a journey map. They weren't so good at helping them articulate value to a community. So we found this to be a little bit of a gap. We also found out that Scrum Masters, especially when they were coming from the external, they weren't in a position to meaningfully contribute towards that vision. if you have a person coming in right from from the street, so to speak, and they don't know the business or they don't know the business unit specifics, it's very difficult for them to actually help that PO. So even if they had the capability, their lack of context made it difficult for them to step in right away and be helpful. What we also found is that sometimes the product owners were reluctant to receive help. So, I got this, or almost like a godlike complex. So we had to help encourage them to take help when it's being offered. And then the last piece of there is on this, our observation, is that sometimes the product owner leadership, so not the product owner themselves, but the people that product owner actually reported to, or that the project reported to, they often operated in that whole, I'll say, command and control or anti-agile patterns. So this really kind of operated against how the product owner was trying to move towards. And so that creates some challenges for us. So how do we respond? Similar to what we did with the POs, we did the same thing with the Scrum Masters. So we started to support and supplement the Scrum Master training and curriculums that we had with product owner capabilities, not so the SMs could be product owners, but so the SMs could help the product owners. We actually tried to pair up the Scrum Masters with the product owners as early as in the life cycle as possible. So rather than waiting until the project was officially kicked off in the Agile way, Scrum Masters were being brought forward earlier in that life cycle to help out with the vision setting. So whether it's creating a canvas, a journey map, or a story map. And we found that to be quite effective. And if there's a big learning for me as an Agile transformation as a whole, is that we encourage the swarming and mobbing. So rather, and this is in my own spirit of I'll say, vulnerability or transparency, in the early days, I felt compelled to provide the answers. Do this, do that, for no other reason. I thought that was what my role was to be. As I got going, or I matured more into that role, if I can be so bold as to say that, what I discovered the role should be is to get the other product owners together and swarm or mob the problem. So rather than having the POs respond to a coach or a Scrum Master, we started to get the POs to actually work with one another. We started to get the POs and the business to work with one another. So we try to tackle that problem beyond a specific project boundary to actually build that capability inside that product owner. So they didn't feel that they were, all the weight of the world was on their shoulders. They were now part of a global village that was able to help out with that, which ironically is part of the self-organization that Agile encourages as a whole. So that's kind of how we responded to that whole, how do we get the product owner to be more well supported in the organization. So let's wrap up. Couple quick things, then I'll field some questions. And apologies if I'm going quick. I'm scared to get yelled at by Kevin, so I am moving with pace. So a few considerations. You're not going to convince me otherwise. The product owner is incredibly important, and it's equally difficult. Often when you look at all the things that they have to take on and the challenge that they have, the question I get asked from some of the folks is, well, why would anyone ever want to be one? But when you talk about someone who's creating change inside of an organization, someone who can actually drive value and make a very impactful change in how we do things, that is the product owner. So if that's something that you ever wanted to be, that agent of change, that value creator, value aggregator, that is the product owner role. So that's why you want to do that. Another piece here, product owners, they can't be bought. You can't go to the market in the street and say, get me a product owner for this project and just have them step in. I know there's always going to be exceptions. So it's once again, a sweeping generalization, but more often than not, you have to build and develop the product owners from within the organization. And if you don't have that capability, it's going to take time to build it. And that's that third bullet point there. It's the arc of a product owner inside the organization. So your leadership in the organization will expect that you have a product owner step into the role, being 100% fully equipped, enabled, and just driving stuff immediately. If you're new to Agile, it doesn't work that way. It's going to take time for the product owners to start to get grounded. Even within the team, a brand new team, it's going to take more than a couple of sprints for the product owner to get their groove. That's an experienced product owner. So this takes time. It does take a village to raise a product owner. So how are you you can't put all this responsibility and accountability on their shoulders and then walk away. How can you as an organization support the product owner with additional roles like enabled and empowered Scrum Masters, communities of practice, agile coaches, fostering that network of other product owners to help one another, breaking down those cross organizational silos. And so for me, this last piece here is more the motherhood statement that I truly believe is that the product owner is as much a capability as it is a role. And so how are we now starting to teach things like backlog management? How are we starting to teach the concepts of product ownership to everyone, not just the product owners? I'm done, Kev. Is there any questions, or is that can we just run off into the sunset?
No sunsets and no running yet, Joey, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much, by the way. We do have some questions, and they're all really, really good ones. So I'll just kind of rush back to the top. Joey, since we do have a few minutes, and this one comes from John, and it's a good one.
Next question, please.
Yeah. He asks, John, you want to go ahead and ask your question? Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Joey.
Hey, John.
So yeah, just experience that no doubt you've had, and we've all had on the call around organizations who are very traditionally waterfall. What would your advice be for moving us more towards agile delivery?
Yeah. Okay.
Told you.
That's the question you start with. Thanks, Kev. Yeah, that's a big topic, Kev, John. To be honest with you, so what I would do, you have to start small. Like I really believe that. You certainly need leadership support. So to go back, if you're trying to do this without leadership support, you're going to have a whole waft of problems. So you need to check your lines of communication up. Sounds very anti-agile, but it's very pragmatic. Do you have support? Because things are going to be different. How you report on a project, how you source a project, how you have team, that resourcing complement of the team itself will change over time. If you don't have support from above, you will be looked upon as a heretic and taken out of the organization. So I was fortunate that all the leaders I had in my tenure in the Agile COE, they provide amazing support in terms of resources, in terms of missteps, in terms of guidance. So first and foremost, I would completely do that. Second, on that same vein, is that once you get their support, I would start down small experiments. Let's take one team, and let's do something different with that one team and move them into a Scrum or a Kanban or whatever the case might be. And I would change the language. I would 100% change the language. What do I mean by that? Instead of saying we're going to take this project out and we're going to make them an agile project, I would say you take that team and you go, we're going to do an experiment and we're going to do something entirely different. And the reason why the language is so important, and it's only in the last 2 years I really discovered this, when you say we're going to do an experiment, you're giving people the permission to fail. So we're saying, hey, you're no longer a project manager. We're going to make you something different. Hey, you're no longer a solution designer. You're now a delivery team member. Hey, you're going to report now on scope, schedule, cost. I'm going to do this thing called story points. And because it's an experiment, if it doesn't work, that's okay. So you're really taking them out of the environment and moving them into something entirely different. And then learn. The last piece here is don't overbake it. It's an agile value and principle unto itself. Is get just enough of your collaterals and guidance together and let the team run. At least I even fell into this camp myself. You want to provide more. You want to provide the prescription, the recipe, and that was in full transparency, that was a Joey mistake. I'm the model of how you fail fast, John. What I should have done is provide just enough guidance and then let the team run and then learn from the team. Instead, I wasted time and built all this guidance and practice, and then the team still course corrected me. So I got to the same spot, but I wasted time with the guidance up front. So that's off the top of my cuff. Leadership support, take them into a small experiment and get just enough guidance to get them running. Not bad for the off the top of my head.
Well, I love the change of the language. I think that's a really good one.
It is. Well, that's because you're British.
Say more.
Oh, I hope there's no one. Okay. I know, John. So no, all the people typing frantically into the chat thread. I know, John. I'm just poking fun.
I know Bunmi had a really nice answer for that as well, Joey, that he put in the chat. So which kind of echoed a few of the statements that you made as well. But he did have a good follow-up question for you as well, is how long did it take Suncor to get to the current maturity level in Agile delivery?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question too. I know leadership will always drive to that type of question. And so I can appreciate the question itself. Here's my answer is that, well, one, we're at year 3. So you can you can take it at at face value that way. I would also say that maturity is team dependent. And so to me, that you'll hear Mark Lyons and Scott talk about this a lot, is context counts. And so we have some amazing teams inside the organization that are agile ninjas. Like I bow in that general direction. And then we have other teams that are really just kind of on their start of their journey. And so for me, the agile maturity, it differs by department, differs by team to team, it differs by where the team is in their life cycle. So for us, I think as much as anything, it's cliche, but you'll hear it takes about 2 years before you get to a tipping point where leadership and language and teams are all at that, hey, I think this is working. And so for us, I think that's about right. About that the 24-month mark is where we start to go, this is going to happen versus this might happen. And I believe that was probably one of the questions you're driving to, is we became more of a success around that month 24, give or take. And now we're just trying to mature as many as we can. Hope I answered your question. If not, hit me back up.
Well, you answered my question. I asked that question because oftentimes organizations think that going agile is an event. You switch one day and then everyone is agile, but it's a process. It takes time, and it's good to know that it took you. Well, you're in year 3 and you're still ongoing. It's still ongoing. You're not there yet. So, thanks for answering that.
What's funny, Bummy, is the guy who kicked me off on this project was a guy, I'll call his name out, Jake Turner. So Jake Turner was the GM who got me going on Agile, and his order was, hey, go figure out this Agile thing. That was literally his marching orders to me. Oh, okay. And I remember 9 months in, I remember him coming back to me, and Jake's awesome. Like, this is not in any way any kind of derisiveness. He gave me support and monies and everything I asked for. So full props to Jake. But at month 9, he goes, have you finished this Agile thing? And so it's that same type of what you just said. They think it's a light switch, and it's not. And that's that month 24 is that people then became aware that it's a continuous improvement journey that never stops. It's good, insightful question.
Just to let everybody know, we're just coming up to the 1 o'clock hour. Joey has graciously said he would stick around for a couple more minutes because I know he's got to jump to a class. So I do have another question for you, Joey, from David. He asks, how does a product manager role relate to a product owner role?
Well, that's also yeah. I want to have other presentations to other classes that have easier questions than these. I don't think that they equate as much as some people will want them to equate, first and foremost, David. So a project, and here's why, and I'll try to answer it. Some people will put them in there, and it does not mean, what I'm about to say, it does not mean a project manager cannot be a successful product owner, full stop. But I think we have to separate the roles from one another and the mindset that comes with it. So having been a long-standing PM, having taught project management for way too long in my life, when you think of all the things that wrap up in a project manager, it's very much an inside-out success metric. I'm going to define scope, schedule, cost, and I'm going to work toward that scope, schedule, cost to make sure that the organization understands that scope, schedule, cost. And when I hit that, I'll classify myself as a success. What that means is that you become more of a task manager. I'm going to define your deliverables, your work packages. I'm going to define the activities to build those work packages or deliverables, and then I'm going to resource it and cost it out, and then I'm going to track it and do change requests. I'm discouraging change. I'm discouraging the pursuit of value. I'm discouraging the team from actually empirically identifying the best way forward. The product owner lens, the stance, is now inverse. I have an outcome or value I want to pursue. I'm going to prioritize those outcomes. I'm going to first chunk them into smaller pieces. I'm going to prioritize those outcomes based upon value and risk. And then I'm going to have the team tell me how to go get that value or the outcome achieved. I'm going to let them dictate the timeline and or within the sprint or the sprints and the cost thereof. So project management has a very, and both roles are successful, don't get me wrong, but a project manager has a very definitive approach. Their how is very defined. A product owner has a very defined how as well. They're not the same. So a project manager that has the right mindset can quickly jump into that product owner role. A project manager who has a waterfall mentality, command and control mindset that tries to become an equally waterfall centric or command and control product owner will not be successful. So I hope if you're online, David, if I didn't exhaust you with boredom there, did that answer your question or how did that sit?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Hit me up on LinkedIn or otherwise if you want to delve into that more, David. It's a good question. It's a tricky question too.
Great, thanks.
Joey, we did have a few people that wanted to, I know, pepper you with a few other questions. So is the best way to contact you through LinkedIn? Is that going to work for you, sir?
Absolutely, you bet. Okay,
that's awesome. Well, again, we're coming up. So we just passed the 1 o'clock hour. So I would like to thank, first of all and foremost, of course, is Joey Roa. Joey, I know you're a very, very busy person. So your time is just, it's, you can't measure that. So thank you very much on behalf of PMI-SAC. And of course, Claudia at SAIT, I know your continuing sponsorship is, we wouldn't be able to do any of this without you. So thank you once again for this. And I just want to thank everyone again for joining us. Your time is very valuable, especially over the lunch hour. I know Joey is a fantastic presenter and this was a great topic, but it's really, really nice to see this many people that are jumping on board. So I want everybody to have a fantastic and safe day. And Joey, thanks again. Thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, guys. My pleasure. And yeah, reach out however I can help out. I'm always keen.
Joey, you take care.
You bet.